like you all to help me welcome Rayyan Hassan, the Executive Director for the NGO Forum on ADB. So we're going to have a bit of a discussion and chat, but what I would really like to happen is, as we move through the discussion, is to get your feedback and questions from the floor. So if you've got any points that you want to raise, just jump in, because we want to get this to be as interactive as we can make it. So, thank you for coming.
Pleasure to be here.
I'm Emma Walters, I'm facilitating this discussion, obviously. Can you tell me a little bit about the NGO Forum on ADB, like when it was established, how it's structured, who its members are, what its role and mandate is?
Well, the NGO Forum on ADB is a civil society network. Right now we're across over 12 countries in Asia. South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, and the Caucasus. And the membership is basically composed of grassroots organizations, social movements, people's organizations, and local groups. Saying that, we also place ourselves similarly with the way ADB frames its constituencies. And the membership primarily is looking to monitor projects and changes in ADB policies and their implications on the ground. Obviously, we come in with a human rights and environmental justice focus in our overall mandate, but it wasn't always this way. It was a very small initiative. I think it started off here in the Philippines late in the 80s. It was like 20, 30 odd organizations started monitoring ADB projects in the Philippines and realized that questions needed to be asked, and headquarters was here in our region.
So was that a formal organisation at that point, or was it a loose collaboration?
It was a loose network called the NGO Forum working on the ADB, and it was hosted by the Legal Rights Center, LRC, which is still a forum on November. They focus on indigenous peoples and legal rights. And from then on, I think broader solidarity was required on questions on resettlement. And then we found projects in India, projects in Bangladesh, Nepal, Central Asia, Kazakhstan, and that's how the membership sort of grew. By '92, it became alive, coordinate regularly.
And how many members are there in the network?
Well, on paper, it's at least 250 plus. It's a loose network, so it depends on where the projects are. And we have members which are also national platforms. So for example, here in the Philippines, one of our largest coalitions is the Freedom of Debt Coalition. So they have chapters all across the province, and then their partners too.
So there are different networks within the network?
Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. Well, we have a little bit of a video from about the NGO Forum on ADB, which we might go to civil society in the region.
Well, first of all, I think we have to recognize that Donald Trump has won the US elections. And this is the first time a fascist is in power of the most powerful country in the world. And we don't know which direction is he going to lead us all into. Saying that, you have a lot of autocratic regimes right now in Asia. We have major environmental challenges. We have 1.5 degrees Celsius, which is required for the planet to cool down into to sustain all life on Earth. That being said, inequality is on the rise. We need sustainable development goals now, not only just development goals, just to make sure people are fed and clothed and are able to live in a clean environment with access to safe water. And then we come down to civil society work, which is difficult. As you can tell, NGO Forum on ADB is an independent network, so we don't accept funding from the ADB, and that allows us to ask it very difficult questions. And even now, the fact that the bank opens up to us to ask it difficult questions shows that this is a relationship which is both necessary for the bank as it is for accountability in general. The other issue of current context is the Asian Development Bank enjoys immunity as a lender to all of its borrowing governments. So borrowing government constitutional laws and courts are basically exempt from holding ADB accountable. So when we as a civil society network decide to talk about accountability of the bank, we are pretty much looking at the bank's own internal processes processes and mechanisms which try to provide its own checks and balance. In other words, is ADB being compliant to its own rules? Now that's the biggest issue here. On that note, I probably want to say, I would quote Barack Obama's last speech in the UN General Assembly before he left, and Obama said something really interesting. He said, even America probably needs some checks and balances at some point. And keeping that frame in mind, development finance in Asia really needs to have some checks and balances, considering the scale in which infrastructure projects are going to roll out across different countries. And now there are new players on the scene with the AIIB.
What's the AIIB? Can you spell that out?
The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, which is right up there in the thinking of ADB as well in its own strategy. Because now, for once, I guess, outside the usual Bretton Woods institutions of the World Bank, the ADBs and the IFCs, you have the BRICS Bank and the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank as new lending modalities available for governments for infrastructure. So in that context, when we talk about civil society space, we really are looking at challenging large amounts of funded projects. And we're talking in the scale of millions of dollars or billions of dollars of projects being rolled out on communities which do not have anything else to challenge it with. So in that space, civil society comes in and tries to articulate the needs of the people on the ground. And sometimes that's not a popular thing to do. The government doesn't find it tasteful. The banks don't find it tasteful either. And that leads to, I guess, restrictions. Now the real examples which we face in terms of shrinking space of civil society, I think that's been a term which has been a little bit overused in NGO and development circles as well. So one of the things that we face in shrinking space of civil society is restrictive laws in the name of national security. If you're going to challenge the state and any development funded project, and if you're going to challenge your government and ask them, where did the money go? How much did that particular well cost? Is the cost of cement and rods really that high in building that well, which was funded by the World Bank or vis-a-vis? You're not allowed to ask those questions. If you ask them too many times, then you're a risk to national security. So we've had members in Pakistan who were trying to monitor a Chinese-funded coal project recently incarcerated on alleged terroristic alliances for 3 months without a court order. Finally, they let him go, and they found him not guilty of those charges. But those 90 days was pretty much a slap on the wrist to say, careful, don't ask these kind of questions between China and Pakistan and infrastructure. So that's one of the realities that we face. A lot of NGOs now are facing restriction in national laws on where they are housed. They used to be housed under the Ministry of Social Welfare. Now a lot of NGO laws are being shifted to the Department of Defense and the Ministry of Defense. This has happened in Sri Lanka, this is happening in Cambodia. So which makes, I guess, Big Brother scrutiny over NGO operations much more focused. The other issue that we face is abductions. I don't know if you're familiar, in Laos, you had Sombat Sompon, who was a popular democracy activist. He has been working with us for a long time with other networks on human rights issues. He was just going back from a meeting and he was just abducted 2 years ago. No trace. His wife wrote a letter in the Asian European People's Forum asking broader civil society globally in Mongolia, where I was 3 months ago. And the letter said something very important. For you guys, it was another activist which went missing and you did sign-on letters and petitions and all that. For me, he's not come home and there's no resolution. And just don't forget that. Yeah? So here we are in another space and we're talking to you guys and we'll tell you the same thing. Sombat Sompon is still missing. It's been 2 years. We don't know who just picked him up in Laos. Was it the government? Was it some political party or whatever? The other issue is a constant interrogation of what we do. And as you are aware, NGO laws have changed in China as well. And I was attending meetings in China. since the NGO law was shifting, we were asked a million questions. They pull you out of the airport and ask you 4 questions on what NGO Forum on ADB is, why are you challenging development finance, and show your papers and all that. So that's daily life of what we do. The other area which is starting to really hurt us the most is freezing of accounts of forum members on the ground. And this has been happening as well, that because we are funder driven and the funds come from international sources and private foundations, the restriction of funds basically kills the advocacy on the ground. Now, the key aspect for an independent network or any watchdog organization is going to be not only the funding, but is the funding allowing you to be flexible, to ask difficult questions? And if you're going to freeze those accounts, then how on earth are you going to work? And yeah, that's pretty much one of the sums up the territory on which we operate.
Okay, I might just throw to some of the members of the audience about Ryan's comments and whether you've found similar experiences where you come from, whether there are different challenges, different trends with civil society. Has anybody got any comments on those comments?
Yeah, I have some comments.
There's a microphone there. Maybe Suzanne, you can help turn it on.
Thank you very much. My first query is, let's just see CSO. How do you define CSO? And what is the difference between the CSOs and NGOs? Because NGOs also consider themselves as a CSO, right? You said that check and balance. What is the authority of the CSO? Who gave the authority to the CSO to have the check and balance of the financing sector in the governments and the financial institutions? Because in some of the countries, ISOs, NGOs, they are not recognized, and they are not, your works are not that recognized, So I think it would be say if you could clarify in these issues, it will be very much useful for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Should I?
Yeah.
This entire broad spectrum of what we call civil society, it's not uniform. It's diverse. You have international organizations which are coming from very wealthy countries. Then you have local organizations which are on the ground, like fisher folk groups and farmers groups and forest groups, which are basically collectives of citizenry, of people on the ground trying to occupy natural resources on common property. So they form collective formats. So when we're looking about asking questions to the government, and if you're really going to ask us about what we believe CSOs are, for us, civil society is basically the voice of the consciousness of the people on the ground. Now, who has the mandate to make that call? It is going to be the local people and their local groups first. So here I'm from Bangladesh. I run this network of NGO Forum on ADB. I'm answerable to the international committee, which is formed of the collective grassroots organizations. They have an election, and then they compose of the board. So any action which I take is basically a representation of the collective voice of the grassroots constituencies that we represent. Now, do we have international organizations who are members? Yes. And those international organizations believe in the same mandate, that it is the voice of the local people and the local communities which should come first. Sometimes I've walked in with members, and this happened in the last AGM, I can share this one experience with you, where our local member from Nepal was arguing about a particular investment from the ADB on a hydropower project. So my personal position is, I've been doing this for 4 years, I was trained in Australia and all that, so I've got all these weird ideas about how things should go. And what he was demanding was ADB should not invest in the project at all. And I was thinking, that's not going to fly. The bank is still going to push for it. Maybe you want to talk about social impact assessments and EIAs. But then again, I have to keep my mouth shut because we are led by our membership. And if the local people and the local groups demand that ADB disinvest, then we will support that call. So that's the way the forum operates. I don't know how other groups will resonate with us, but those who do, generally, we work with.
So on the checks and balances and who gives the NGOs authorities, do you have any views about that?
I don't think one requires a mandate if that particular project or that particular policy affects your life directly. That by its nature gives you the mandate. I mean, I could ask ADB that who gives you the mandate to decide which way the road will go without doing meaningful consultations on the ground. Nobody has given anybody the mandate at this point, but for those who don't have a voice and don't have the resources to back it up, I think they do have the mandate to challenge what is being done to them. The first question is, do they really want the project? Has that been asked? Is this a hydropower project which is going to give electricity to the village in which the hydropower project is being built? Are we asking the demands and the needs of the people? So I think the mandate should come from the ground at all times.
Are there any other comments on the trends and challenges? We've got another one from the floor.
I'm from India, and I mean, not myself, but through friends, relate to almost everything that you said about what NGOs and civil society organizations face. My question is, what are the broader implications of these trends for the way ADB should be engaging with CSOs and how CSOs should be approaching ADB or engaging with them?
Well, we're looking at incremental changes from the ADB as an institution in the right direction. Open spaces to speak. When policy reviews are happening on safeguards, we have to write a few emails, but then somebody responds back and says, all right, let's talk policy. So you see movements towards which the bank is trying to listen to the groups which have concerns, and civil society being one of them. But does it enter the DNA of the bank and its core operation of lending? Is civil society opinion going to shift the way in which ADB is deciding to put its money through different loans in different sectors? We're trying to bridge that gap here. I think it goes both ways. But from our end, I believe as civil society, there are some things from the bank you will expect information disclosure and compliance, but some other things you have to demand. So I would also ask the ADB to respond to that as to how do you think civil society should be engaging?
I can't respond because I'm not from ADB, but I can ask people in the audience. Heidi.
I can say something to that. I work in the NGO Civil Society Center. My name is Heidi Dupree. I recently, in the past 6 months, have been working with the Pacific Department to implement technical assistance projects. And these are projects that ADB has, is the executor on the project. And so we actually have more freedom to work with NGOs, and actually we're looking at different ways to engage with NGO in the operations. And in doing so, we actually allow for more room for NGOs to advise us on the best way to go forward to implement the projects. So in the technical assistance, there's actually quite a lot of room for NGO and ADB to work together, but you have to go through the contracting, but the proposal and what our procurement department call lump sum output-based contract. So the NGO can say, well, this is the best way to do it, and we propose it this way. And then the ADB staff would then evaluate the proposal based on the quality, and the NGO would be the expert to provide that input. I think another thing we can do too is when we have grants to government, ADB can influence how and who the government can work with. We also can recommend different groups. So it's really important we have our civil society anchors who are here from the resident mission, and also our regional department focal like Leni and Francesco, because they can advise their project officers into these are the groups that actually can work on this particular project, and they have these kind of specialties. I'm in the process now of putting together a document to give my mission leader, the names of organizations and their specialties and their expertise. So then once these NGOs are identified, they have some inputs into the project. When they implement it, they can help advise the project officers. So these are some of the ways that they can influence the project, but my colleagues may want to say.
We've got another comment up the back. Do you want to come to a microphone, please?
I'm Eileen from International NGO. Thank you for sharing your work. Amazing experiences, particularly on restricted context. Just two things I'm curious about, and I also want to learn from civil society. First one would be because NGO Forum for ADP is really instrumental in the accountability mechanism part. Accountability is a two-way process, it's a two-way communication, bringing the voices of the people to like for this instance, the ADB. How do we ensure that the closing the loop, the feedback loop on the communication, like once you've let the voices of the people being heard by the donor, the ADP, that particular feedback has to come back to the people, to the particular sector raising it. So I'm curious to know that, because that's also our challenge, being our size sometimes limits us to do that. Second one would be, what are the principles of engagement as well for us on CSO? When is the time that we also have to say we need to step back and do not engage? Because this is not a time for us to engage. So things like that also we need to have a balance.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question, really, and that's our day-to-day. In most cases with the accountability mechanism scenario, you have to understand the complainants or the most affected are not really aware of how Asian Development Bank operates or how Asian Development Bank's accountability mechanism works or what the compliance review panel does, what the Office of the Special Project Facilitator does. And there's a big challenge that a lot of project information is not translated into local languages. So that's where our members and local civil society groups, the regional networks, we all have to chip in with our technical resources, financial resources, and energy to translate all of that in a meaningful way. So, because they know that their rights are being violated, but they just don't know how to carry that information to the institution. So that's how we bridge that gap. Now, once that information has been taken to the bank, it goes through the bank's own checklist of if that complaint is eligible or not. And that is a bureaucratic nightmare because there are many rules in there, and those in the ADB are nodding their head because you guys are pretty familiar with the rules. And for us who are not bankers, we needed to be familiar with the rules. And then we realized these rules sometimes are redundant. There's a lot of red tape involved. There are many reasons. If you write the wrong name on designation, the complaint never reaches the right office, and it's illegible. It's, you lost all the credibility. It will be disregarded. All right. So in a perfect situation, the complaint is found eligible. If it's found eligible at the OSPF level, then that's the problem solving.
What's the OSPF?
Solving part, right? But this is within the jurisdiction of ADB's management, so it's not an independent problem solving. So does management play into what is going to be risky for the bank? Does it weigh in with those decisions? Is this going to cause bad press? So you never get real solutions from problem solving as much as you would get it if that institution was completely independent of management, because management has influence there. So in our experiences, projects in Cambodia, years have gone by in problem solving and we don't get remedy on the ground. So then you move to compliance. That's where it gets more tricky, because then you're looking at broader policies of the bank and have they been compliant to it on the ground. Now to make that understandable for the community, that's a huge hurdle. Now, do we really need to file a complaint? I think in our track records, and we were talking about this previously 3 months ago when there was the Accountability Mechanism Summit here in ADB headquarters, and we were talking about remedy. And groups who had filed complaints, Naga Coal Power Plant, Philippines, Cambodia Railway, ongoing Tata Mundra, remedial action is hard to come by. Why is that continually happening? The answer is really with the bank on that one. Sometimes the investigations being done are absolutely brilliant by the bank. They know exactly what went wrong. And then give that information to the bank to come up with a remedy, but for some reason the bank is not responding quick enough. And how do you explain that to the constituency? Because you filed a complaint on their behalf, and you ask them all these questions, and you did documentaries and all that, but you go back with nothing. So, which brings us down to the question, is the bank really listening to civil society? And if it's listening to civil society, why is it not acting on it? And what can be done to change that consciousness? Yeah.
So just going back to that closing the loop question, what do you think about the capacity of CSOs to engage with an institution the size of the ADB?
I think for us, the challenge is obviously we're on the back foot. We're a loose network, we're underfunded, and a lot of groups which are not even NGO Forum will feel this way. Those of us who are in the NGO world, we're constantly trying to raise funds to pay salaries and make sure the organization's running the day-to-days, right? But saying that, I think there's a huge gap between civil society and understanding bank operations, where the bank really needs to step up and make sure that civil society understands how the bank moves. Accountability mechanism outreach, it's a step being taken by the compliance review panel. I think it's a good step. People across all the countries where ADB is lending money need to know how to file a complaint, what the processes are. And ADB has to take that to the ground and explain it to them. Yes, it's not going to lead to rosy solutions, more problems, more complaints, but if you really are a meaningful partner of development and you want to alleviate poverty, then you have to open yourself up to criticism and rectify if you've made mistakes and own up to it. So, yeah, outreach is required.
Okay, so let's move on a little bit. What particular issues or opportunities do you see for CSOs engaging in ADB work? So what works and what doesn't?
Well, for us, just to simplify it, we look at ADB engagement from the forum side on two fronts. You have project monitoring, which is on the ground, and you have institutional reform, which is looking at policies, strategies, and operational guidelines and how you can make it meaningful. There's a lack of space of debate on constructive dialogue on what sustainable development should be between civil society and the bank, and I think there is space there to create that a little bit.
How would you like to see that happen?
Well, I can tell you as to what we've experienced so far.
Yep.
We have the annual governors meeting. I think that's the only space at the ADB where civil society and groups which are unpopular like us, who ask unsavory questions, are allowed to speak to the president. We host our panels and we can talk about human rights and all that. And I must say, it's the almost 50 years of ADB now. And for allowing me to speak here and say all this without security pulling me out, it's a big thumbs up to the ADB as well. You know, they're opening up. And this is not being seen by other banks as well. Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank is a brick wall. I mean, I can't even imagine having a conversation like this with the AIB at this point because it's so restrictive. So if the bank has already allowed this space to continue, then how can it be better cultivated, right? The frequency of these discussions are very minimal in the yearly calendar of the bank. I can give you a clear example. Yesterday we had well, they're calling it a consultation on this ADB Strategy 2030, which is they're looking to revise its own strategy. That is a place where I think broader civil society across the board, not only advocacy groups like ours, have to participate and articulate their thoughts on which way ADB is going to lend money. And this is going to matter to all the issues which you guys care about. But the way it is being done is not meaningful. There is no approach paper which is uploaded in a public domain for all of us to read through, critique, and see what it means for our individual constituencies, and we feed back, and then the bank integrates it, comes up with a draft, and we go through rigorous consultations, and we finally get somewhere. Now that meaningful, honest gesture of interacting with civil society is missing. We can do this, which is nice. I said yes, and we're going to talk. But if you ask me to do this again in a month and nothing is changing, then at some point we're going to say, nah, this really isn't working anymore.
So you've talked about at the policy level. What about at the project monitoring on the ground level? What opportunities are there or issues for CSOs engaging with ADB?
I think the first and most important thing, and this is not only for the Asian Development Bank, this is for all the multilateral development banks, is to ensure that project-related information is provided on the ground. And that is the first step. That is the first step. Even before a project is rolled out, are consultations meaningfully being done without coercion, without government pressurizing local communities to say things in an open and free space? If it is an ADB-funded sovereign loan project, then that should be in ADB's court to allow to happen. There is a public communication policy in place of the bank which talks about meaningful consultation, but time and again it's not being done. So the question is due diligence on the ground. Staffing on the ground. Is there somebody who's reaching out from the resident mission to each of those projects which ADB is funding on the ground? When it came down to the safeguards, environmental and social safeguards delivery, the independent evaluation department of the bank did a research and studied 85 safeguard specialists of the ADB and looked at what they were doing in their yearly calendar. And it was found that most of them were busy reviewing consultants' reports and not spending time on the resident missions or on the field side. I think it came down to one visit per year, and that too on a resident mission, and you want to ensure livelihood restoration and resettlement issues of multiple projects. That just shows that management is really not taking this as seriously as it should. So what you really want to see at the project site level is a response mechanism which provides information, which allows feedback. Something like an accountability mechanism has to be there on the project site in a format where local communities will know, all right, if something goes wrong, problem solving and compliance are spaces which we can access without coercion, without backlash, because these are government, local government operated projects. So if you complain against the project, you're complaining against the government. Can ADB ensure witness protection? There are these deeper questions in terms of organizing and implementing something like that in a meaningful way, which ADB needs to address.
Okay, I might just go to the floor again and ask for comments on the issues and opportunities for CSOs engaging in ADB work.
I have a question about ADB activities with the civil society. Some activities with the entrepreneurs, different entrepreneurs, and some activities for service delivery. But your contracting system is same for service delivery as well as the entrepreneurs. If go for service delivery, this is quietly different from entrepreneur. Because of that, our experience in urban primary healthcare services delivery project in Bangladesh, this is a service delivery project provided primary healthcare including emergency obstetric care. If you go for low cost bidding, this is one thing, low cost bidding. And another thing is quality of the services for the maternity and primary healthcare centers. A low-cost bidder never would provide quality services. Never. It is if you give if you provide quality medicine, quality doctors, and quality other services, need more money. If you think low cost is the important and one of the criteria to get the project, it is very difficult to provide healthcare services in the standard or quality. Though it is a loan money, urban primary healthcare services delivery project get two donors money, one for Swedish SIDA and one ADB. ADB is a leading organization and co-financed by SIDA. But SIDA money is a full grant money. But contracting system is similar to those the entrepreneur. This is very difficult. Because of that, all of the NGOs, those who are working with the urban project, and every organization are non-profitable organization, and they give bank guarantee. You know, bank guarantee is not a papers. They need money to deposit in their bank, and then they give bank guarantee. One thing. Another thing is double bank guarantee. One guarantee for performance guarantee. If you do not provide a performance guarantee, then bank guarantee will be bank money will be forfeited. And another will be advance payment guarantee, advance payments money against advance payment money, and to guarantee provide NGO how small organization come to the bidding. It is not possible to provide guarantee. And another is the performance guarantee. There is no system to NGO assessment if they are capable to provide the services or not, if their experience is have or not. There is no assessment organizational assessment capacity. There is no system. I provide to one, I collect one documenter because the consultant, and provide one document and with the papers and submit to the for the project. And then I get, because I am a low cost bidder, then I go get a project. And that's why some NGO already surrendered for the project. This is difficulties to continue the good work, and for the sake of the our beneficiaries also. We are committed to provide the quality services, but present bidding system, it is very difficult to provide quality services and commitment. Because of that, 30% of the all of the services provided to free of cost through red card holders. Those who are living in those who are poor.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
yeah. So it is there any thinking or policy you can revise your policy? Those who are service providing project, those who are locally service providing project, you can rethink some design.
Okay.
And separate design for there.
All right.
Thank you.
Are you able to respond to that from the NGO?
Well, our organization is actually independent. So on this particular issue, because you're an operational NGO, which has a partnership with ADB in providing social services, our mandates are different, clearly. But it seems from a very layman point of view that the point which is being raised here, that NGOs are being treated like private vendors, which are subcontracted, and then whoever gives a low cost, cheapest possible option is being chosen. And I think there needs to be a differentiated approach on this, because you're dealing with something as important as public health sector and children's health, and that requires a certain sensitivity and of course experience and skill sets. So I agree fully with you. There has to be performance evaluation and expertise assessment, and a separate method on how NGOs are going to be contracted for social and environmental services. That's just.
All right, thank you. And I might ask Heidi to talk about that in her response at the end of this session. So, do you have any specific recommendations to strengthen CSO engagement in ADB work?
Well, I think there are, from our end, there are three particular areas in which ADB can work more to allow civil society to have a more integrated and meaningful role. The first is ADB has to have a clear space to allow groups which are independent and advocacy groups to have a meaningful space on the policy table to discuss development outcomes. I don't think the ADB can insulate itself from the changing landscape of Asia. I know there are many upper middle income countries and middle income countries where ADB is lending now with extreme inequality. So in that context, listening to advocacy groups on the ground where civil society space is so limited and bringing them up to have a meaningful discussion on information disclosure, on safeguarding, on accountability, on procurement even, has to happen. The second issue that you really want to do is you want to build capacity for NGOs and civil society to understand the bank and its meaningful processes. And multiple languages. I think there are over 2,000 languages operating in Asia, and I think the ADB translates its working documents in only 7 or 17. I mean, the numbers are dismal here. So, like, we went to Mongolia recently to do a fact-finding mission on a prospective coal power plant, the CHP-5. ADB is thinking of co-financing with IFC and some French funding. They may fund into associated facilities. So when we talked to the resident mission in Mongolia, they didn't have any of the project information translated in Mongolian for the Mongolian groups to understand. And we asked them, why don't you have these project documents translated? I think the response which our policy coordinator received was, we don't have a budget for it. The ADB doesn't have a budget to translate the environmental social impact assessment report? Come on. So there needs to be due diligence at that level. There's just no other way. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, and do you have any recommendations for CSOs, either individually or collectively, about how they can better engage with ADB?
Well, collectively, I think the demand of the time is the crisis of the climate. There's something which just cannot be avoided. The deeper question which you want organizations to really ask is, even the ones which are a part of the operations as well, that are the development outcomes being achieved on the ground fulfilling sustainable development goals? And are you keeping count? And is the ADB keeping count in the same way? And to be frank, the ADB has a culture of loan approval and GDP as the ultimate barometer of output of success as a bank. Even from different levels of operations in the bank, different sectors believe that if the loans have been approved, then we've done our job right. But did that mean development outcomes on the ground in line with sustainable development? The original mandate, let's not forget, Asian Development Bank was created to alleviate poverty in Asia. Is it fulfilling its mandate? And that the only way you can get that answer is if you listen to civil society very carefully and ask them, did we do it? Did the people tell you, did we do it? And that conversation is still waiting to happen.
Okay, we're almost finished. I just wanted to know, at a personal level, what do you feel has been your major achievement with the NGO Forum on ADB?
I came in 2012. I had a head full of hair, which is gone now.
I actually would like to welcome my colleagues to come and join after my responses. I may not have gotten everything. One of the biggest challenge I found, I was in Rayyan's shoes about 5 years ago. I was an advocacy NGO person. I worked with large NGOs for about 10 years, and I came to ADB working in the NGO Civil Society Center thinking, that we need to build advocates from within the institution to bring about changes. And we have actually some really good staff in ADB who work really hard. I remember Resident Mission Indonesia, we have Ayun, our colleague, who was a focal person. Now we have Wiwik, who are really much championing engagement with NGOs. And Lainey has done a great job in building capacity of our colleagues in Resident Mission in her region, and Francesco's worked with his NGO. So I think we have groups of people in the institution who really work hard, and Chris Morris, we have to give him credit for always being there everywhere with the board members, with management, to really create space for engagement with NGOs. It took Suzanne's been here with us for a long time, and Suzanne's came from NGO sector as well. So we have people in the institution who brings about change a little at a time. The challenge is that We work with project officers who are really pressed for time. They're asked to do more, and the documents they have to fill out and the process they have to follow are really heavy. And so in the past year or two, we've been looking at our midterm review and say, how can we streamline some of the processes so that it's easier and faster to be stronger, faster ADB. But that comes with a lot of challenges. Before I left Washington, D.C. to come to Manila, a colleague from the IMF said to me, you know, every small step in the ADB is a really big step. You have to understand that because it's a big bureaucratic institution and you work in that framework. There are days when I ask myself, what am I doing here? But then events like this make me feel like, you know, we're making a small dent and we're actually helping to bring about change, and change will take time. One of the biggest change we have yet to make is in the operation, and that is, you know, if you look at NGOs and if you look at private firms, I mean, ADB mostly contract out to professional private firms who can compete and bid for the big works and projects. NGO, actually there's a lot of capacity that still needs to be developed. And the question is it the role of ADB to help build that capacity? Because a lot of times our process and procedure requires a lot of documentation and process and bookkeeping, finance, all these things that it's really hard for NGOs to do because it adds to the cost, right? So our procurement colleague had done a lot of work to say, well, we'll allow this for NGO. We'll allow them to add in, you know, when they make the bid, to add in financial people, to add in all this. We can even give advance if it's NGO. So there's a lot of things that will be discussed, I think, later this afternoon that the procurement people have been doing to help make it so that it's easier for operation NGO to work with us. But at the same time, it's a process, and it would take a while to bring it to the completion. But I think the capacity building of NGO is real as well to help them do that. If my colleagues have other things to add.
Thanks, Heidi, and thanks, Emma and Ryan. You gave a great presentation, and I think you articulated really clearly a lot of things that are issues that ADB face. I think those of us who have been inside for a while can really relate to what you've said. I guess I want to encourage you to pass on this feedback more directly. I know you have a lot of connections in ADB. I know you know loads of people, because my experience has been that people are willing to answer and respond to. If they hear things, they are happy to have more information from a different perspective. So, you know, the translation thing, I agree, it's a huge problem. And the way our translation team works is that they work in response to requests. So you know about our work in Myanmar, and you know we've recently translated things into Kayan Po, Kayan Sagan, Mon, Shan, and Chin languages, right? Which is a long process. We're trying to build up a dictionary of key ADB words in each of these languages so that they get translated into the same words each time. There's a lot of words that in some of those languages have different interpretations. So we've spent a lot of time with that. We've also been approached by advocacy groups to do the safeguard manual, but they asked to do it in an innovative way, and so we've actually crowdsourced the translation of the SPS in Myanmar language that an NGO is leading, an advocacy group is leading that crowdsourcing. They're translating some, and then they're having these meetings where they get together and work through the translations. So there are pockets of ADB work that are open to all of this, and so I want to encourage you to, you know, think about what are the main priority areas and how can we, through the NGOC and those of us working in operations, help you to figure out what to do. Because I think if, you know, a lot of times when you say, hey, this needs to be in Mongolian language, then people can say, okay, let's allocate resources to that. There's a need for it. Somebody wants it, right? Because a lot of times we just go along the way we've been going, and without that request, the process won't start on its own. So I'd like to encourage that. And I guess The other thing too is that we haven't talked about our government partners very much, and that's another really important dynamic. You know, when we're talking about how we engage with civil society, yes, ADB has its plans and its objectives and its business processes, but our client is the government. We are owned by the governments of these 67 countries, and so how governments want to engage with civil society is a really big piece. And I think we could also use more advice and guidance from organizations like the NGO Forum on ADB on how to get them to see the value of engaging with civil society from project concepts. You know, when we're talking about how we're going to engage, how do we get the government to invite civil society to be part of that dialogue? And I know you all have worked with a whole range of, you have connections in many different areas. So I would encourage you to help us in that angle too, because that demand will start the processes within ADB. So, thanks.
All right, thank you.
Just a very quick one, because I hope, Ryan, you can stay later on the focal point for South Asia on CSO. You will see in a few minutes maybe a little signs of what Heidi defined as a big step. But simply to echo what the lady said, first of all, I guess not easy to be in your shoes, so I really do not envy you. I don't envy myself sometimes, but and I think the least that a bureaucratic organization can do is give you a little bit of a better help here and there. So for instance, on the translation side, she's right. I am now translating in Sri Lanka the sector diagnostic for gender in Tamil and Sinhala. It didn't take me much to get the funds or to submit a 2-page proposal. So I guess either we all need to go back to psychology and understand. There must be organization of psychology. I suggest maybe you take a book or something to understand us better. It's that little trigger. So what we'll describe to you later is the results of a major effort. On the most substantive effort, the procurement thing, I think 2 to 3 people in this room, NGO, including the lady on my left yesterday, we had 1 hour of a boxing match, which will be brought into the closed door of the institution today. There's a meeting in the afternoon, only with the procurement people. Again, I was sorry to see how easy it is to address a problem if you got the right people around the table. So again, please keep observing us. You have maybe a few interlocutors more, not high power, but we're there to help you if we can, to, I guess, better understand what's going on in terms of workers. And even, Doctor, you raised your issue very, very eloquently today. You know that we will discuss it this afternoon, but there is a working group, just to give you an idea, what she, through her project, has triggered is that there is a human development working group only dedicated on procurement issue in the social sector, led a little bit by South Asia. But so what I'm trying to say, we are a bit reactive, but I guess we're trying to do something, not the best. So anyway, there is more coming if you can stay.
All right, thank you very much. Do you want to make any concluding remarks?
Yeah, I think I want to talk to some of the people at ADB who do a lot of hard work in the right areas. And this is just for you guys. Yeah. There are some things which civil society and ADB in years of interaction have achieved. Really good safeguards policies. If we compare it with other banks, some areas can be better. But the question is going to be on implementation, right? But there needs to be, you guys need to be aware, after January 20, once Donald Trump comes into power, there is going to be an enormous change in which way the board is going to think about serious issues and serious projects, especially coal projects, fossil fuel funded projects, projects in countries which are autocratic, like Uzbekistan, and where forced labor is prevalent. Those of you who work in the ADB, there might be a need to wake up and say no to some of the decisions which might be coming your way. Because you really need to look at the fine print, and it's going to have ramifications on every one of us. We'll be out there screaming and shouting as we always do, but yeah, it goes both ways.
All right, well, thank you very much. I'd like you to join me in thanking Rayyan Hassan for spending an hour with us this morning. Thank you very much, and I think we've got to change over to another session now.